So I have a lot I could say on this project as a whole, and if you stick with me through my ramblings, this video might kind of turn into a diary of sorts. So just hang in there, and there's probably like maybe a few things I'll say which are interesting. For the inception of bioluminescent soundwaves as a concept originated from a video I watched recently, like maybe the past year or two. It was a video showcasing something called bioluminescent algae, and it was on the shore of an island I unfortunately cannot recall the name of. As you would swim through it, these little tiny blue lights would light up in response, and it would look absolutely gorgeous. And then in early 2023, in between workshop days, since at the time I was participating as an auditor for a film conducting workshop, I was drafting up ideas for a sort of chill EP, specifically chill lo-fi EP, and I imagined a scene where someone was listening to music through their sound system. I imagined as the music played, you could actually see like the actual sound waves coming out of these speakers and filling up the room. And in addition to all of that, the sound waves would actually physically react like the algae, in the sense that they are actually alive. So with this mental image, I then proceeded to draft up a sonic template for the entire project. And this template essentially consisted of a mix of the elements I had already drafted up for a chill EP, as well as the cinematic, orchestral and epic characteristics of what I usually write. By marrying these two aesthetics, I was essentially able to create something which I had never created before. And so this track, Bioluminescent Soundwaves, is essentially the overture for the entire project. It sets the tone for pretty much every other song to follow. And I also want to mention real quick that for this specific track, I really emphasized the Dorian mode, since for me it has a very particular kind of happiness with it, that it's not like major, for example. It's a sort of kind of chill, kind of cool, almost otherworldly sort of happiness with it. It's kind of hard to describe, however, that's sort of how it feels for me. The other main thing is that this track puts a very heavy emphasis on two characteristics. Those are playfulness and hopefulness. These two characteristics also set the tone for the rest of the project as well. Nightly Ride a Lullaby is kind of inspired by something very specific for me. Back when my fiance and I still lived with our respective families, whenever we would hang out with a friend at their house, or just hang out really anywhere in general, we were never able to sleep in the same bed overnight. And because of that, if we were hanging out at one of my friend's houses, he lives out in the boonies, so there's pretty much no one else out there, I would essentially have to drive my fiance back to her parents' house at some really late hours of the night. So we're talking 2 or 4 a.m, just really late hours, right? There was always something kind of oddly magical about those drives, in particular because of the fact that since it's so late, and since we already live in a really small town, there's not really anyone else on the roads at that time. It just really feels like we are alone in the entire world, and because of that, we feel much closer to each other on those drives than on average. We've had to separate a fair few times in the past for various reasons. Like, not separate, like, as in break up. However, like, when she was attending college, she would, like, I think her college was like a few hours away, which in the grand scheme of things isn't really awful. I think it was maybe only like 3.5 hours. Those periods of time where we couldn't physically hang out as often were rough, and we would have these late night Skype calls, and we eventually transitioned to Discord. And even just on those calls at night, we would feel oddly closer than we were on average. It's really weird and hard to describe. It's like a kind of magical, bittersweet feeling. Nowadays, my fiance and I actually live together, so like those late night drives where I'm driving her home are a thing of the past, and I wouldn't say I would ever return to those times. However, I will say that there was something really magical about those times, which has created memories that I hold really close. Nightly Ride a Lullaby is essentially inspired by all of this, and in particular the feeling of bittersweet nostalgia. I think that's probably the most coherent point I can make on it, so we'll just go with that, basically. I can't think of a whole lot to say on this one in particular. However, I think the main thing for it is that this track retains the same playful and hopeful characteristics I discussed in the first track. This track also features one of my colleagues, Sandra Friedrich. I think that's how it's pronounced, or Friedrich. Apologies if I didn't pronounce it correctly. He is a master of so many instruments, it is insane. And one of his instruments he's really good at is the bansuri. And I know for this project I really wanted to feature that instrument in a track in some form, because it has a very particular warm and calming texture to it, which I felt would contribute really well to the vibes I was shooting for, and Sandra really delivered here. Aether Doubts is, I think, the first track in this entire project where the characteristic of madness is actually introduced. This characteristic is also introduced because for the final track, Opalescent Soul, I wanted to include the playful and hopeful attributes as well as a sense of insanity. And Aether Doubts is the first instance in this project where, you know, things are playful and hopeful. However, there's also something that's kind of rumbling under the surface, and there's a very particular kind of ethereal tension. Like, it's hard to describe, but like, you're happy, you're excited, however, there's something waiting to explode. I think the main reason for this particular attribute of insanity fitting so well for this track is because when I was writing Aether Doubts, in particular in the intro, it uses what are colloquially referred to as space chords, which are major chords which are a tritone apart. So like, you can have an A major chord, for example, and then you play an E flat major chord, and it has like that kind of happy sound to it. It's what I imagine the exploding brain meme would actually sound if it had a sound, right? This chord progression and my sonic template, I think, allowed me to create a happy yet intimidating atmosphere without straying super far from the positive vibes I have worked through every track up through this point. This track also features layered vocals between me and my fiance as well, which resulted in this really interesting kind of far back hazy choral texture while the guitar is performing like whatever solo. And in addition to that, if you listen close to the harmonies of this same section, the harmony actually is descending for pretty much the full duration, which also fits very well thematically with the lyrics. For Strange Lights, this one, let me kind of provide some context first for it. So I am a very light sleeper, like incredibly so. Anything can wake me up, and anything can essentially keep me awake. I think this was sometime in 2021 where I had this period of time where whenever I would try to fall asleep, I would be laying in bed and I would like actually feel tired, and then once I felt tired enough, I would like jolt awake. And in particular, I would feel like this weird surge of energy like coming from my core and just spreading out through my entire body. I have no clue what it was at all. I've heard like maybe it's a hypnic jerk or something like that, but I don't know. I was so convinced that something was wrong with me that I scheduled an appointment with a physician, with a new physician, because at the time I did not have an actual personal physician. However, I unfortunately couldn't see her for like a few weeks, so I had to put up with this issue for a while. And on the nights in which I would like really struggle to fall asleep, I actually resorted to writing notes to myself as best as I could in the shadows that would say things like, I'm okay, I'm going to pee okay, I'm okay, and just, variations thereof. It was kind of a like self-soothing thing for me. It was a sort of way of changing my mindset on the situation, because as I'm sure you know, if you get frustrated with the fact you're not falling asleep, you'll become full of energy and you won't fall asleep, and you're just kind of making your situation worse. So in that scenario, with that example, I was essentially trying to keep myself calm so that I just had to figure out this situation and that's it. I'm not contributing to making my situation worse, essentially. And I also feel like as I've gotten older, I feel like I've really more realized that the mindset you have has a very direct impact on your body and how you're actually feeling. And this is why in really stressful situations or just, unpleasant situations, I try and retain a sort of calm demeanor towards it, and that actually helps, I think, a ton. I also try to focus on breathing and centering myself, because there's just something so effective of taking a few seconds, collecting yourself, and then addressing the situation. It has resulted in a much less stressful life for me, and it is wonderful. This track, Strange Lights, is essentially inspired by that idea. With the lyric, slow down, breathe with me, hold my hand, divorce the dark. Like that lyric, for example, is pretty obvious what it's saying. It's just like, slow down, chill, breathe. And I also want to mention as well that my friend Julie Helvin also features on this track, and her voice is absolutely perfect for like these really calming, soothing, warm and loving vibes, and she absolutely nailed the vibe I was shooting for with this track. And I think that covers about every song I wanted to cover in this video. I have a few other tracks I want to address as well, which I will cover in another video, and I will cover Opalescent Soul in its own video since it is a massive track. Till then, I will see you later.